It's natural to choose certainty over curiosity. But what if certainty is a myth? What if our best and hardest decisions come not from choosing what's most obvious, but from developing practices that help us move wisely through the world? Decision making is a regular part of the work of leadership. And increasingly, it seems as though decision making is getting more complex and binary approaches are failing. So, what do we do when we don't know what to do? Today's guest, practical theologian and author Dr. Angela Williams Gorrell, who has done a ton of research on people who have made difficult decisions, unpacks for us how we can lean into a slower, more collaborative, more discerning way of moving in both our organizations and our personal lives. Dr. Angela Williams Gorrell, thank you for being on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Dr. O'Donnell Long. I am so excited because we're not only colleagues, but friends to talk about wherever this conversation goes. I'm eager to jump in.
Yeah, me too. Also, we don't get to call each other doctor very often, so that was kind of fun. Where we just doctor, hello doctor, hello doctor. So I like that starting off
Hmm.
good. Yeah, it's a real treat to have you on the podcast. Our work goes back a ways. We did our PhDs together. We always
Hmm.
talk about all the different things we might do someday, and we found little places to collaborate along the way. And so I'm really looking forward to helping our listeners get a bit more of a look into your work today.
Oh, I I always find it really cool to be able, like, I think as a practical theologian, to have a conversation with someone who knows not just my research and work, but my life.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
so because I'm really interested in research that touches on everyday lives, like on everyday people's lives. And so I'm always eager to talk with someone who's like, "Hey, tell me more," and relates it to my life and the stories that I've lived.
Yeah, also side note, I know I have many questions for you, but side note question. I do you I have to explain to a lot of people what practical theology is. Do you have to
Mhm.
explain to a lot of people what it is?
No, I don't know. I'm just kidding. Yes, absolutely. The moment you
Yeah.
say that, people do one of 2 things. They either say, "Isn't all theology practical? And if not,
Yes.
like, why wouldn't it be?" And number 2, they say a version of, "What the heck is that?" And so for anyone listening who might be feeling either one of those ways, um, I think that, yeah, so practical theology for me is really about the relationship between theological ideas and culture. And sometimes those ideas show up in the form of churches and other kinds of organizations. And sometimes those ideas show up in lives or all, I guess it's all intermingled. And so both of us, I think, are interested in how those ideas are lived out and then how we can think about those ideas in relationship to a wider culture.
Mhm.
But also, like, more than anything, so it's really like faith and practice. And
Mhm.
so how do we live the stuff that we think about in better ways? Yeah. Well, how do you talk about it?
Yeah, I like that, and I think it actually sets a good framework for where we wanna go. I am I'm growing, I'm evolving in how I'm talking about it. So, I think our 4 questions, the questions of our entire discipline are really important.
Mhm.
um, in that I think what practical theologians care most about is not necessarily what to think theologically, but how to think theologically and
Mhm.
how to engage spaces. So the 4 questions being what's going on in the world, why is it going on, what ought to be going on, and we use a variety of sources for that ought to,
Mhm.
right? Scriptures, history, etc. And then how do we move forward? And it's
Yes.
one of the reasons why I love you're a multi-author at this point. You're 3 books in, but it's one of the reasons why I love your new book so much. I'm gonna hold it up for those looking at video, and I'm gonna read the title for those listening. Braving Difficult Decisions: What to Do When You Don't Know What to Do. And this to me feels like a book that comes out of all the orientation that we just described. What's going on in culture, and how might theology engage that? How do we make sense of our environment? How do we look for kind of normative things, but then very intentionally move forward toward the way of God? And um, I I have met a lot of people over the last however many years who are in the midst of making difficult decisions. And I think it's a particularly important topic for anybody who finds themselves in whether it's formal or informal positions of leadership. And here at
Mhm.
the Dupree Center for Leadership, we feel like the world just desperately needs more good leaders. And one of the things that is so central to leadership capacities and competencies is decision making. Now,
Mhm.
our entire theme for this season of the podcast is wisdom, and I think that wisdom is a really interesting intersection with decision making, rooted in all the practical theology stuff that we just described. So, I want to start with two questions for you, or I guess I want to keep going with two questions for you. Why did you write a book about making difficult decisions, and where does the idea of wisdom fit into your work?
I I think that, well, first of all, that you can't make a difficult decision without practices. Like, you can't make a good difficult decision
Mm,
without a set of practices that are related to this idea of, like, being a wise person or developing wisdom over time. And so I was really interested in writing a book that would help people not only to make a wise decision about whatever complex choice that they were finding themselves in, but really to develop a set of practices that would help them to strengthen that muscle of wisdom in their life. I think a lot of times especially as leaders, I think we want to say, like, I want to be a wise person, but maybe we don't feel like we have a roadmap for how to get there. And so I wanted to integrate different forms of research that would allow people to say, oh, if I want to develop this practice of wisdom and discernment in my life, like what would that take? What are the actions over time that I would want to engage in that would help me to do that? I decided specifically to write this book in part related to my own lived experience. I absolutely found myself in 2020 at a crossroads where I needed to make a really intensely difficult personal decision related to my marriage. And then a couple of years later, I found myself in an 8 month discernment process where I was up for tenure, which, if you're not familiar with the academy, those who are listening, is a huge promotion. And some people might ask, like, why would you walk away from a huge promotion? Well, this promotion, in many ways meant, it meant saying a version of like, I'm in line with this institution. I want to live in, I want to work in this institution for a lot of years. And for a number of reasons, I really questioned within myself. I mean, I felt that questioning within myself, God's voice, I would say, and related to my own inner knowing, I felt this stirring within that was like, you need to really think about whether this is for you. And so over those few years, I found myself reading different books on discernment, talking with people, and then noticing that in my work with students as a professor, and then thinking about my work as a clergy person for 14 years, I realized upon reflection that so many people had come to me with a version of the question, what do I do?
mhm,
And so I started to think, like, what would it look like to write a book that was a journey that would help
mm,
people not only to develop practices of wisdom, but actually start in one place and end in like start in a place of like, I don't know what to do, that would give them stuff to do in that liminal space between not knowing what to do and deciding something. And so I integrated 3 strands of research that I found helpful in my own processing. One was these books of discernment. I found, like, there were so many snippets that were really, really wonderful from, like, this book and that, and I thought, "What if I integrated this into a journey, all this good stuff from multiple books?" And also multiple traditions.
mm,
Oftentimes, I think as a Christian, I can, like, just lean into this tradition of mine or that tradition, and I was like, what if I gleaned from the wisdom of multiple Christian traditions? And then secondly, I thought, I found myself reading autobiographies and biographies of people who've throughout history made really bold choices and trying to learn from their processing. And so I integrated those stories and what they did throughout the book. And then finally, I interviewed 15 people or so that have made difficult decisions,
Mm,
and 7 of their stories appear in the book.
mm. Wow, okay, a lot in there. You used the words, which I love. You used the word stirring, which we're gonna come back to in a moment, so I wanna just put a little pin on that. In an earlier episode from this season's, podcast, Uli Chi said that the 3 most important words that he had to learn to say the hard way as a leader were, "I don't know." And I think that the what you're adding to it that's kind of, like, blowing my mind a little bit is not only I don't know, but I don't even have a container or know how to get to the I know, which is
Mhm.
a very vulnerable position. It's very risky. It's very potentially disorienting, and, there's just all kinds of stuff that are going on there. You mentioned a little bit, and especially in your work as a clergy member, and certainly in your own life. It's the reason why I love this book. I mean, I think that when people write and speak and teach out of their own lived experience, that brings a particular kind of wisdom. But your work today has you working with a lot of different people across a lot of different industries and seasons of life. Those are terminologies and frameworks that are important to us here at Dupree Center. I'm curious, like, what you're noticing right now, collectively or individually, about where we're lacking either wisdom or where we really feel these I don't knows and we need or long for the roadmap that you're describing.
A couple things come to mind immediately, and one is that we we desperately want certainty more than we want to live out curiosity.
Mm.
And I think when we just love the idea of certainty. But one of the writers that I read, she was talking about what she called the myth of certainty. Her name is escaping me right now. Sister, uh, you know how this happens.
Of course.
I know
It's
I could
midlife, right? Is it
and
midlife?
it is
Somebody
midlife. It's also just, oh, I've read 400,000 books.
Oh,
Like,
okay, yeah.
every once in a while, right?
Nice flex there. Yeah,
Chittister.
nice flex.
Chit
Yeah, I've read
Joan
400,000 books.
no,
Yeah.
no, Joan Chittister. Okay,
Woo!
Sister
You got
Joan,
it.
she right, thank you, that's what I needed, just a moment. She
You're
writes
welcome.
about the myth of certainty,
Mm,
and, like, so there's this idea that um I think a lot of us, like, we long for certainty, and we just think, "If I could just be
yeah.
certain enough, then I'll make the right decision," quote, unquote, you know? But also this happens as we're making decisions with other people and, in community together and as a leader, and it's like, we care more sometimes about getting it right and being certain that we're right than being curious about those around us, being curious about how we might have gotten it wrong, being curious about, how to get from "I don't know" to, having that container of how we might discern together. Yeah, so I'm thinking a lot this morning about that actually, and then, like, so curiosity over certainty, like, how would that change the way that we make decisions together and decisions in our own lives as individuals and also decisions in society, like, politically together? Um, and then also, I'm thinking a lot today about, how to have conviction with humility.
Mm,
Like,
mm,
I was, like, writing really early this morning, um, and so I think that there's this way of as leaders, there is a way to both have convictions that we hold very clearly. I like the image of like open hands. It's like I'm
mhm,
holding something, like I have beliefs, I have thoughts about how we can go forward, I have values that shape the practices that I engage in on a regular basis, but I hold them with open hands because I realize that like these need to come and go freely and that
mhm,
I'm incompetent to know what I don't know.
mhm,
You know, and so I always make any decision as a leader in a community, as a person in my own life with humility. Like I look
mhm,
at the Hebrew scriptures and when it talks about wisdom, it's always in relationship to humility.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I don't know if I told you this, but it's not like some big secret reveal, everybody, but it's just a little thing. Several years ago, I found myself in meetings, and I would look down at my hands, and they were, like, balled up,
Mm,
and it just kept happening, and I first of all, I just had to come to, like, notice it, right? Notice what was happening and why it was
mhm,
happening, and my practice became, like, this work of being open-handed, and
mhm,
it was, like, my phrase of the year for a couple years, to the point now where that noticing, that reframing, that small little muscle building has actually shaped my spirit as a more open-handed person. So I'm like, "Oh, actually, I have a lot of practice with
mhm,
opening my hands," which helps me be able to keep my hands open, not just in the meetings I find myself in or when something happens that feels stressful or outside of my control or any of the other things that make me sort of want to retreat into myself. But in these complex moments where I don't know what to do, I actually find it easier to be open handed. And I
mhm,
don't think I had really put that together before you just said that, that the small little physical embodied practice has actually shaped how I've shown up as a leader years later.
mhm,
Which is why I I appreciate so much that you've organized our roadmap around practices, not necessarily around certainty or formulas but just these different things that with our hearts
mhm,
and minds and hands that we do over time. There's a beautiful collection of prayers that are interwoven in it that help us become the kind of people who are more open-handed. And so,
mm.
right? Like, in that it's just kind of an interesting image.
Yeah, I love that. I love that and, like, the connection that you're making between how that practice has shaped the way that you participate in meetings and in
Mhm,
conversations. I
mhm.
feel like the wisdom of our bodies is often neglected in, religious communities, and there's so much wisdom that can be there. Like, a really, quick example is just, like, when I think about going in this direction, do I feel like I have an elephant on my chest? Do I feel like butterflies in my stomach as we talk about, like, so to speak, right? Or do I feel a freedom? Like, do I feel open? Do I feel lighter?
Mm.
What do I feel in my body? Like, can I listen to my body as a teacher, as, like, something that's signaling to me? And how do I notice that and then allow there to be some wisdom there that informs my next step?
Yeah, notice it and trust it. I think the
Mhm.
trusting piece
Mm,
is I hear that from people. I hear that from a lot of women in particular, like,
yeah.
trusting the knowing that's
Mhm.
inside, whether that's described as physical, embodied, intuitive,
Mhm.
empathetic wisdom, all of sort of these different categories of knowing.
Mhm.
That's okay, so that's helpful. Okay, so you have your book is organized very creatively through a variety of S words: stirring, surrendering, seeking, sensing, summoning, and so forth. And I want to go deeper into a few of them. First one is stirring, which we put a pinpoint in this word earlier, and now is officially the time when we're back to it. You described stirring as this when we find ourselves in the I don't know what to do. And like you, I just have come to recognize that as a very, very secret space, right on the edge of whether catalyzed by pain or possibility. Like we're there and we find ourselves in the I don't know. I'm curious, just your sense, either from the research that you did in the book, the people that you work with, your own life. Do you think that the "I don't know," is that a voice? Is it easy to identify as that's an internal healthy, maybe even God-given voice? Is that "I don't know" some sort of doubt that's coming from external sources? Help us make sense of the "I don't know" and the stirring a little bit more.
I think it can be any of those things. I don't know that I think, sometimes it's an external force in the sense of, like, someone says to you, "You're fired." Well, then you're finding yourself probably in a place of, "I don't know exactly what my next step needs to be, but I gotta do something about this." Maybe, it's an external force in the sense that someone, says to you, like, they wanna end their relationship with you, a family member, a friend, someone you're in a romantic relationship with, you're married to. and so on. I mean, that's an external force that becomes a stirring within that says, "Oh, I have to respond to this. I have to respond to this life transition." Sometimes it's a mix of both, where literally we're finding ourselves in a like a transitional point in our life. We're entering into adulthood, and we have to really figure out, where do I want to live, where do I want to work, or maybe we're in midlife and we're trying to figure out something related to having children. And which way we should go with that, or whether we should at all, or maybe we're in later, the third third of our life, and we're trying to figure out what retirement looks like. So sometimes it's just, and I would say that's like a mix of both, sort of societal pressures or societal structures, and then also our own internal voice that says, I need to respond to this at this moment in my life. And then other times, it really is simply a more of an internal conflict that we find. Like, I feel like I'm not living aligned. I feel like I'm
Mhm.
not living with integrity. I realize I'm not flourishing as a person, or I've been doing a lot. My wheels have been spinning a lot. I'm on the hamster wheel, and I don't feel like I'm living authentically or
Mhm.
awake, And so it could be all of the above, I think.
Yeah, okay, so you touched a little bit on the different seasons. I wanna go a little bit more into that, and I wanna quote you to you here. Which always fun, right? Like, what did I write?
Yeah.
Okay, you write this, maybe you're midway through life, and you're talking about midlife in this,
Mhm.
you're kind of talking about the seasons here. Maybe you're midway through life and unexpectedly it dawns on you that you're as close to needing a ride to a friend's house as you are to needing a knee replacement, and you're working how to spend the next years of your life. So first of all, like literally, my knee's been hurting me recently. So, so I was like, "Oh my gosh, like this is me." Only I think I'm
Mhm.
officially closer to the knee replacement side, which was
Mhm.
a moment I had not quite thought before. So thank
Yeah.
you for that segue.
Mhm.
But I do think that it's worth asking if these big decisions follow the arcs of these larger distinctions in life, right? You mentioned young adult, emerging adulthood. You mentioned midlife. You mentioned what we at the pre-center call third, sort of, if you want to put it in a formal job term, retirement. Do you notice
Mhm.
that the big decisions correspond with those seasons? Or the I don't knows correspond with those seasons?
Yeah. Yeah, I think oftentimes they do. I do. I think that when we look at back at the biggest decisions of our lives, they probably do correspond to our age and just a natural, order of living that our culture provides. Yeah.
Yeah, I this is something that we've kind of grown in attunement around at the Center over the last several years, and I think we've talked before about an author I love on transitions, Bruce Feiler, and he would say his data shows that adults undergo major transitions, which are all kinds of decisions are baked into transition moments, like you said earlier.
Mhm.
Actually, every 12 to 18 months, which is doesn't follow the seasons of life per se, but then he would say 3 to 5 times throughout the course of adulthood, 18 plus, we have these big life quake moments, and
Mhm.
I do see some parallel to that, right? Some in each season, and so I just think
Mhm.
that's worth saying that if you're kind of finding yourself in the midst of or on the cusp of a new season and you feel like the big I don't knows are kind of hitting you at a more rapid rate.
Mhm.
I think you're not alone there. Okay, I wanna
And I
move
say,
to
well,
yeah,
wouldn't
go
you
ahead.
say, and the same's true for like an organization. Like, there are
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
natural
yeah.
points where your community, your organization is gonna be making some difficult decisions,
Mhm,
Like, there are difficult decisions, like, when you're starting it, and then a little bit into it as you start to grow, like, what are we gonna do with this growth? Or as you start to get smaller, like, what do we do about that? And then how do we continue to keep reimagining ourselves so that um that we don't get stagnant, that people don't disengage or detach, and also in some cases so that we don't die as an organization. So
mm.
I think there's also a natural arc of organizations where big decisions come along.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for making that parallel, and I'd be curious to take some of your frameworks into team contexts
Mhm.
or into collaborative decision-making scenarios and, work through some practices there because I think you're right, and I think it's even more complex when you get more people at the table and you
Yeah.
got your own stuff going on, your own personality, your own way of making decisions, and then you've got a group and you've got mission and all of that. So yeah,
Mhm.
thank you. Thank you for naming that. Okay, so next I want to go to shedding. So define shedding for us first.
Yeah, it's letting go of things that are no longer serving you or your community.
Okay, and then you quote Joyce Sullivan. She was new to me. I
Mhm.
didn't know her work, but I'm not going to read her whole poem. But every time I've read this, which is probably 5 times at different, I don't mean 5 times in the last week. I mean 5 times over the last 6 months or so. I've come back to it. She says, "We don't give enough glory to Exodus. In any new life season, you can't make a big entrance without a really glorious exit." And that oh, that felt like a profound shift. Something was happening maybe just internally inside of me. But I was also thinking about like, literally the book of Exodus in the Bible,
Mhm.
and which is, to briefly recap that, the Israelites are liberated from being enslaved people under very oppressive and abusive Egyptian pharaoh. And they're in this journey, like through the
Mhm.
wilderness and eventually into the establishment of a new covenant with God. And so I was thinking a couple of things at the same time. As I was reading this, I was thinking about Exodus, and I felt there is this impulse to want to go big, right? To want to have a big entrance and therefore a big exit. And I'm wondering if you think, and I'm actually wondering what I think here too, if this same rhythm of rupture and repair, of exit and entrance, of exodus and liberation is found in the smaller, quieter, I'm learning to open my hands in a meeting kind of rhythm, or if it's
Mhm.
really reserved for the big stuff.
Yeah, yeah, it's not just absolutely. I think it's integrated more in the small thing, in the small moments and small actions that we make, and then maybe that one day, like those over time, become what looks like a glorious exit. I think as a poet, when I hear Joy's, writing here, Sullivan's writing here, perhaps I should say, when I hear the word glorious, I don't hear from her, everybody it's loud and everybody notices,
Mm,
necessarily, or like I have to make a big show about it. I hear it in the way that she talks about nature later on in the poem of, like, there's a beauty to it that, like, it doesn't have just because you're leaving something that maybe you've been a part of for a long time, like, it doesn't have to just be an ache or just be, um, like, yeah, hard, that it can be glorious in the sense that there's freedom there. There's permission to grow. There's,
mm,
you've given yourself permission to change your mind. And I
mm,
think that, the chapter before this on summoning is really an invitation to summon from your past things that can propel you into the future and help you imagine a future, whereas this is, reflecting on the past and, like, what you need to let go of, what you need to give yourself permission to grow from in order to move
mhm,
into the future. And I think sometimes in organizations and as individuals in our lives, we think that we set up a kind of false binary, and we think we have to choose between the 2, like, either I hold on to my tradition and the stories that have made me and the people who believed in me, or I let go of who I've been and I move on, I embrace a new sense of self, and or we become a different kind of community and take up new practices. And I want to say, and like we get to do both
mm,
as we make difficult decisions. I think we can draw from the past in powerful ways, and we can let go of the past in ways that are incredibly helpful.
mm. That's a really powerful image that glorious, like, isn't necessarily the marching band, right? It's like the quiet song that is
Hmm.
really absolutely stunning and beautiful, but
Yeah.
is not clamoring for attention.
Right.
And yeah, like, and that sometimes some of these biggest shifts are quite quiet, even if
Hmm.
they're life altering
Hmm.
and really directionally shifting us,
Hmm.
whether individuals or organizations. You talked about organizations a couple times, and I think that the the next one I wanna ask you about feels really, really relevant to organized life. So, wherever you want to go, but just know that I'm coming in with that framework. This is sifting, and you talk about sifting when we have contending convictions, or as our friend Scott Cormode might say, competing commitments. And this just feels so real in an increasingly complex world, where there
Mhm.
is the future is, as you've just said, not very binary, not very black and white, even though, as Sister Joan rightfully points out, you rightfully bring up today, there's a human instinct that craves a kind of certainty in the middle of complexity that ends up reducing the task at hand because we it's hard to make our way through it, and we don't have
Mhm.
the skills, we haven't found ourselves here before, we don't have the roadmap, whatever it is, whatever it is. So I'm just I wanna know if you can unpack these contending convictions a bit more, especially in group organized corporate life.
Mhm. I I think that so I talk in this chapter about there being 3 ways to deal with contending convictions. And the first way is to what I call release and catch. It's to realize, oh, this new idea that we've come in contact with, this new belief, this new commitment, this new conviction, it really rubs against this older conviction, commitment that we've had as an organization or in my own life, right? So it's like, I realize all of a sudden, like, one has to be really lived and embodied in my life in this community, and the other one, like, we can't live both, and so we have to make a choice.
Mm.
And then another way of thinking about contending convictions is the idea that, like, you've always believed something, you've been really committed to something, but you need to expand that to make it more capacious, roomier, for other ways of thinking about this thing. So it's not that you're
Hmm.
gonna release it, but you do need to expand your vision around it. Um, and so, for example, like in an organization, this could look like your sense of like hierarchical leadership. Like maybe you're thinking in your organization, like we've always had a hierarchy, and this person's been at the top, and this is the line and everything like that. But then you come across literature that's like this is what collaborative leadership looks like. And so maybe you start thinking about your org chart and you're like, oh, I have to decide between whether we're going to be hierarchical or collaborative. Maybe as a team, you think, in an ideal world, maybe we're like all collaborative and no one actually ever, leads anything, but maybe there's some sort of way that you can expand your vision to realize we could maybe hold the commitments of both of these all together
Mhm.
here. So what would that look like? What would it be an alternative to choosing between the two here? Maybe and maybe it's just like a really practical reason why doing collaborative, like the way that it's described by a lot of books and stuff like that is kind of impossible or something like, anyways, maybe you do it the first way and you release this idea and you embrace the other. But and then the other the final way that I talk about in this chapter is the idea of paradox. And it's where you add the word and you
Mhm.
realize, oh, these things are not actually competing convictions. These are both things need to be held together. And so using sort of the work of summoning and sifting, and shedding, excuse me, maybe you say something like, maybe initially it looks like we as an organization, we need to, we really have important values that we need to hold on to. But we need to change because we need more members of this community, or we need more funding, or something like that. Well, when you think of it in terms of paradox, it really, and you add the word and, it's like we have these values that we need to hold on to, and we need to make some changes to welcome new people or get different funding. And so, like, it's not an either or decision. You're not trying to choose between this deeply held commitment in your community and this commitment in your community. But this looks like in your own individual life, like many things as well. So, like, something like, I really love this family member, and this family member is hurting me a lot. And so you might need to live a little bit in that paradox in order to figure out what you need to do. Um, or this relationship is hurting me a lot and I want to stay in it. And
Mm,
so what does that take? You know? So I think paradox for me is really powerfully like connected to the word and instead of but.
mm, mm. Yeah, when I listen to you talk there, when I think about, the work at multinational corporations, when I think about the work in industries like tech or finance, these industries are just moving at lightning speed. When I think about
Mhm.
healthcare, in which, are on the front edge of just all kinds of scientific discoveries at the same time that, you know, healthcare professionals are in deep service of people. And I think about education, an industry that we
Yeah.
both have been part of, and it's sort of rapidly turning on its head. I think the wisdom that I hear in what you're saying is that these external environments are moving very fast. And the myth of certainty, to go back to Sister Joan, I think sometimes we want to be certain because like we gotta go. We feel like we gotta move forward. And a
Mhm.
lot of times there's like real stuff on the line, people's jobs
Yeah.
and people's well-being and financial responsibilities. Those things are real. But what I hear you saying is actually something that takes more time. It takes relationship. It takes
Mhm.
listening. It takes togethering, if you will. And so I
Mhm.
think figuring out how that can fit in to the structures that continue to push pace and move quickly and have very particular objectives, just even a dose of it, right? Even, and this is the and language that you're bringing to us here, which I think is just really powerful. So that is, yeah, that I'm gonna take that away for myself too and just be thinking with
Mm.
it. Okay, I've got one more question for you. This is a version of this question that I ask most guests, and at the Dupree Center, we think a lot about the thirds. We talked about the seasons here today. You and I are I'm gonna go ahead and classify us both as in the second third of life and leadership, and I'm wondering if you could go back and talk to your younger self, your first third self, your 25-year-old self, what would you offer her about learning how to make wise and difficult decisions?
Make sure you take your time whenever you're making a decision. Like, I do think that there's a real desire on the part of individuals and organizations to hurry and
Yeah.
then to go, "Oh, okay, what did we just do?" Um, hurry up and then realize a few months later, like, the way that we did this hurt other people. The way that we
Yeah.
did this meant that we did change to people and not with them. The way that we did
Mhm.
this meant that we lost people along the way. The way that we did this meant, yeah, and so I think my younger self I think that you do less ruminating when you've done the careful work of
Yeah.
listening and being slower and doing it with doing change with people and not to them, you know? And
Mm.
so that's what I'm still learning and thinking about, and I think, yeah, I wish I could have this like, what I'm saying to you just with my younger self and kinda verbally process it with them,
Mm.
with her, yeah.
I hear, like, just like I feel kindness too, like a kind of kindness and, patience, right? Hey, younger self, like, be kind, to yourself, be patient.
Mhm,
The cost of ruminating is real. Go a little
mhm,
slower.
yeah,
Yeah, take your time. I think that's all really helpful. And I mean, honestly, that's helpful for me to hear today and helpful for our current selves to hear. So thank you.
mhm.
I'm really grateful for you. I'm grateful for your work, for this book, Braving Difficult Decisions. I'm grateful for the ways that you're committed to journeying with people as they ask big questions, as they seek joy, as they deal with sorrow, as they do it all in a digital world. Those are like little drops for Angela's other book, in case you were wondering. But the thing I'm most grateful for is your friendship. So thanks for being my friend and coming on the podcast today.
Thanks for all the questions you've asked me along the way, for being such a wise friend in my life, such a beautiful person that I know. And for everyone listening, I love to connect with people. So if you want to email me through my website or DM me on Instagram, that would make me really happy. I love to connect with people. Yeah.
Tell us your website verbally, even though we'll put it in the show notes too.
Yeah, it's just my name, www.angelagorrell.com. And my last name has 2 R's and 2 L's. So,
Okay. Till next time.
bye, everyone.
Thank you for tuning in to The Hidden Work of Leadership. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and found it insightful. The Hidden Work of Leadership is brought to you by the Max Dupree Center for Leadership at Fuller Seminary, where we envision a world in which leaders across industries and seasons of life are deeply formed as the people of God so that they might seek the very best for the people and systems entrusted to their care. Our episodes are produced by Justin Heap, who ensures our engineering and editing is engaging and sounds just right. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing us on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us reach more listeners like you. You can also follow the Dupree Center on LinkedIn and Instagram for updates and behind-the-scenes content. For more information about today's episode and access to additional resources, visit our website at dupree.org. That's DEPREE.org. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Hidden Work of Leadership.